Diane Hennessy Powell, all
You've
my old
talked
friends,
you
Evan,
you've talked to most of them, right?
Julie, yeah. No, there's a lot that I haven't, but so it's cool. I can learn from you.
All right, so that's my first question. How did you start doing this kind of interviewing and make Skeptiko?
Well, I don't know how you started, but I just started because I've told the story a million times, but I naively thought everyone had these questions. Like, who are we? Why are we here? And when I had the opportunity to be able to have enough free time and resources to go and ask, I wanted to go ask. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. And then podcasting came along, and that gave us all the ability to actually call people up and say, hey, if we do an interview, I'll put it out there, I'll promote your book. Isn't that a good deal? Isn't that how these things are done? And people said, yes, I will. And here we are 10 years later. 10 years later, and I've grown, I've changed, I've learned. It's worked perfectly in that it's been about my personal growth, and I've just learned so much, and it's changed my life.
How has it changed your life? How has it applied to how you live?
What was the last part of that?
How have you applied what you've learned to how you live your life?
And you know what? Let me put on some headphones because I apologize. I always hate when people don't have their headphones on because it screws up the audio. Do you edit all or you don't?
No.
Okay, so people are going to see me scrambling around putting on headphones. That's okay.
That's cool.
So you asked how it's changed my life, right?
How you've applied what you've learned to how you live.
Yeah, I keep trying to rephrase it, Gail. I keep trying to pulling you back because to me it's kind of a two-step process. It's one, how it changed my life, and then how I applied it is kind of different, It's almost like, and this is something I'm kind of interested in exploring right now, is this interplay between science and spirituality, or between science / logic / reasoning and kind of deep spirituality. Because on a deeply spiritual level, this is all bullshit. This is all a game. This is all a dream, And that's the only conclusion we can come to. It's the only conclusion you can come to when you get on this path after a while. So the way I always put it is, okay, putting that aside, let's play this consensus reality game that you and I are really here. We're really talking. There really is something happening. Let's pretend like that's happening. Now, how can I apply it? How can I maybe be, a little bit more of the person that I know I should be? And I mean, that would be a long, long list of little tweaks. And it's everyone's journey, so everyone has to kind of figure that out. But I think the basic message we all get we already know. It's just rediscovering it, right? I mean, that's what every spiritual tradition will tell you as well, that's Buddhism, I mean, the Buddha doesn't learn anything. The Buddha just becomes aware that, hey, I was always the Buddha,
So you're saying that it's a process of rediscovering what the Hindus would call the Atman, the basic eternal soul or consciousness or whatever.
Yes, and I'd say any tradition you go to, you would find the same thing. And I'd also say that that's also in the Western tradition. I'd also say it's in the scientific tradition, if you will. And the problem with it is that it sounds so glib to say it any way that you say it, because we all have experienced it and struggled with it in every aspect of our life, for me as a parent, for me as a child, for me as a young adult. It's all the same. It's not, what good it would have been so annoying if someone would have said that, which they did, you know. I mean, when we were in our 20s, I mean, people told us that, and it was annoying as crap, you know. Like, don't say that, you know. Don't say it's all figured out, it's all one, it's all just acceptance, you know, or it's all love, or it's all, you know. It's not how we experience it. So again, we're diving deep into the spiritual here. What I have done with Skeptiko, because it's been my orientation and just my natural as a guy and as a man who was in business, my thing was to figure it out, you know, and to figure out the who's telling the truth and figure out what the truth is. So I want to be true to that side of me too, because that's how I came to this. I didn't come to it as some kind of spiritual awakening kind of thing, because that's not my experience.
Well, I'm just thinking that Buddha and Jesus, for example, both struggled a lot. They didn't just find bliss consciousness. They had to go through deprivation and extremes, and Jesus overturned the money changers tables in the temple. So I'm not quite sure of where you were going with that, because it seems
well, I don't
like
know.
it is a
I don't know if
struggle.
I believe. I don't know if I accept that from a historical basis about Jesus. That seems like a social engineering project to me. But take that. We could talk about that for a while, or you could set that aside and say the historical Jesus doesn't matter as much as the Christ consciousness that people experience. I'd say similarly with Buddha, or with, you know, any of the different Hindu and yogic traditions, they're kind of saying things paradoxically, right? I mean, that's my read of it. They're saying, yeah, you know, I sat under the tree and said I'll die if I don't get enlightened. And the flip side of that is, and then I realized I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to sit under the tree. I didn't have to do anything. I already was. I just had to accept that I was. So, you know, especially in the non-dual community and in the yoga community, which I think is really cool and has some interesting insights into that, there's always this completely paradoxical kind of thing. Do the work, do the work, do the work. And it's like, there is no work. There's nothing to do. So that's the play, you know.
I guess the work is peeling off our layers of ignorance and, you know, evolving to our inner core, but you've got to peel off the outer layers of ignorance and attachment and all that.
Okay. And then as soon as you say it, it's done. Okay. So there it is. It's done. It's peeled off. Okay. There, you take out, really, you know what I'm saying? Right? Right? Because to talk about it then, it's like I always like to, you know, juxtapose this with the kind of business stuff, because that's kind of my orientation. And like one of the things you'll find in the business literature, and it's so true and it's so motivational, is there's no such thing as trying. Trying is lying. You know, you want to try? There's no such thing as trying. You do or you don't do. You can't try, you know, spit on the ground and try and pick it up. Well, you can pick it up or whatever. You can't try. You either do or you don't do. So peel off the layers. Okay, they're gone. Now what?
Bliss.
Yeah. So are you bliss? I'm not bliss right this second,
I
but
don't think any of us on the planet have peeled off the layers.
maybe,
We
maybe
wouldn't be
not. I
here.
don't know. I just know where I'm at, you
Okay.
know.
What did you major in college? Were you in business?
Business.
Uh-huh. And
I
then
got
what
an
kind of
MBA.
an MBA, and then what kind of business did you create, or what did you do with that?
I was in the computer business.
Okay. Everyone that I've given the Myers-Briggs to of these visionary scientists is intuitive rather than sensing, in that category of the Myers-Briggs, Kiersey and Bates. I wonder if you've taken that.
I can't remember what I was, but I wasn't intuitive.
It's either sensing or intuitive for that category.
Yeah, I wasn't intuitive. So
Okay.
I think I was kind of more in the middle.
Yeah, that's. Do you know how many people you've interviewed for Skeptiko?
I have 400 shows, but I don't. That's not a direct correlation with how many people I've interviewed.
Why?
I interviewed some people more than once. I guess that's the main reason.
And do you know roughly what percent were women? I'm kind of concerned because I think the majority of my people are men, and I want to be representative.
Well, what do you want to be representative of?
Human beings.
Well, in what respect?
That we're half
I mean, I think
male.
that's such a trap. I mean, it's just such a trap. If we're going to transcend those barriers of race and sex and all that stuff, then we have to transcend. We can't drag along all that shit that, we don't like. When somebody pops up, we have to accept them as who they are, whether they're the same thing with sexuality and all the rest of that stuff. So much of that is socially engineered bullshit. I've been on this for a while, and I repeat it, and people who listen to the show are going to be able to just get tired of it after a while, but too bad because so many people haven't heard it. It's like, people need to educate themselves on Gloria Steinem, right? CIA operative, lifetime CIA player. So Gloria Steinem, oh yeah, so you didn't know that. Mm-hmm. So Gloria Steinem, and you know how she's outed? She's outed by a real feminist woman who actually interviews her and says, hey, I've done the Freedom of Information Act. It looks like you're CIA, and she admits it. So this is out there. Gloria Steinem says, yes, I had to work with the CIA, and I have to say, I was willing to take support from anyone because our cause was so important and this and that. Bullshit. It's just not true. So you got to get to the truth of these things, right? Because the truth is that she didn't have to, that she did it, and that she's still a player in that game. Not that I care. Who cares? It was a just cause. Certainly we can look back and say it was an important cause. It was a just cause. We're glad someone did it. But when people focus on that ends justifies the means thing, you really mess up. And the reason I say she's still in it is go look at her most recent thing for a couple of years ago on Syria, where she was advocating women's rights in Syria. And take a step back and go, wait a minute, isn't Syria, aren't they like one of the more secular, progressive states in that region, compared to like our friends in Saudi Arabia who kill women? So Syria, really? And why Syria? Oh, the CIA happens to be backing ISIS, right? We are backing ISIS. We created ISIS. We fund ISIS. We backed ISIS. And ISIS is the people who like to go put those nice hoods on women's. So really? That seems like kind of a political thing. So spin it way back and say, what do we really, if we're not willing to go there in terms of really understanding the full spectrum of how social engineering works and how we're being manipulated, then it's hard to really address some of these things. So you want to be representative of who? Of women?
Half the population. Yep.
Well, I want to be representative of the people that show up at my doorstep that have an interesting message that resonates with me. And I don't want to give a shit if they're a woman, if they're a certain age, if they're a certain sexual orientation, or any of the rest of that. I want to answer the door when the doorbell rings and be accepting of who they are. And I want to balance it out with saying, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I've already had 3 white gray-haired men this week. I need to get a fucking woman on here. To me, that's it corrupts the whole thing. Go jump in with the bed with CIA and Gloria Steinem. I don't want to do that.
And to me, I would say affirmative action is necessary. We do have to take extra steps to get black kids in good colleges or whatever it is. So
God needs our help on that one. Okay. So God doesn't need our help on a lot of things, but on that one, God needs our help. I don't buy it. That's been the justification for every war, for every evil deed ever done. If we take care of our business, if we take care of who's knocking on our door, everything takes care of itself. When we get sucked into thinking that we have some role as a social justice warrior, the chances are that might be good, that might be genuine, but my experience in looking at it is the chances are you're being fucking manipulated.
For justice? You think civil rights movement?
Well, I just said Gloria Steinem. How is that not a complete manipulation? Now that you know that the CIA was behind that whole thing, you can on one hand say, I'm glad that the rights of women were advanced, but you don't care? Do you care what the CIA agendas was?
Sure.
Or are you like, well, then how much do you care? How far are you willing to care? How far are you willing to go? Because I'll have to tell you, most people don't care. And if you go read the newspaper articles, you go read the Chicago Tribune, and you go read all the other articles, no one cared. No one they accepted that answer and said, well, I guess that's how the sausage is made. That's what she had to do. I think that's potentially a big mistake.
Yeah, Steinem herself has made the point that the ends don't justify the means. So she would be the first to say that. So,
but no, but she has said that. She said that the ends justifies the means in the case of the CIA. So she's contradicted herself.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
So what do you do with that? What do you do with that now that you know that? If you're a Christian, what do you do with the fact that the Bible is pro-Roman? Now that you know Josephus isn't who we thought he was, that there is evidence that there was some manipulation going, what do you do with that? Do you kind of, what Christians worry about is, then I'm going to lose all my faith. I won't have any belief. It's like, no, if there's a reality to your experience with Jesus, it will still be there. You can safely tread into those waters and examine whether or not there's a historical reality to what you thought you believed. So,
yeah, we know
I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, the Bible has been rewritten and edited and revised, and so it's hard to know how much of Jesus's actual words are there. But you're right. What you have to do then is go on your personal experience with Christ consciousness, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. But roughly, what % would you say were women of your interviewees, just off the top of your head?
I will not go there. Anyone can go through all of them. I don't want to be there. I don't want to answer that question. To me, I've just spent 10 minutes ranting about why I think that's not the right approach to even ask that question, is to fall victim to this idea. Do we want to be open to people? And do we want to create an environment? You want to create what you're saying is you want to create a level playing field. Great. Be the level playing field. Be the level playing field, and that's all you have to do.
Do you have people that you would have loved to be on your podcast who said no? I'm just curious about the fish that got away.
Anyone who's listened to Skeptiko, I can kind of poke people a little bit. So all the fish that got away are truly fish, are nitwit scientists that I would love to grill a little bit on how completely bizarre their propped up belief system of scientific materialism is. So would I love to talk to Sam Harris? Absolutely. Would I love, and I had an email exchange with him and wasn't able to get him on the show. Would I love to talk to Neil deGrasse Tyson and his just matter-of-fact conclusion that consciousness can't possibly survive death? Because I don't know why, as an astrophysicist, how he's come to that conclusion for someone who's demonstrated clearly that he has zero understanding of the scientific advancement in consciousness. Would I love to talk to him? Absolutely. So those are some of the fish that I would love to have a chance to chat with.
So do you agree with the premise of the Visionary Scientist book that a new paradigm of science, they are creating one now, and it has to do with the critique of materialism and a focus on consciousness and the mind? But it's historic and huge.
Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think to a certain extent, we have to create that reality by stating it the way that you are and by promoting it the way that you are. I think it is useful, helpful, important to look at what the barriers are to that and look at, because there's two kind of barriers to that as I see it. One is this shut up and calculate world that we live in, right? So the story of shut up and calculate, as I've always told it, is, famous physicist Richard Feynman is one of the guys who worked on the atomic bomb and one of the great, scientists of our time and kind of the great thinker on nanotechnology. But he was pissed off at the whole consciousness Niels Bohr kind of question that really those physicists at the turn of the century were really dealing with and saying, hey, we can't, there's no place to go here. It's consciousness, it's not matter, And there was another faction, that, like Feynman, who said, hey, look, shut up and calculate. Put all the philosophical implications of what we're discovering with quantum physics. Let's set those aside because we have some formulas here that take us in a whole different direction and can be the basis for a whole host of new technologies. As it was, the technology we have that is working right here is based on shut up and calculate. Don't worry about the philosophical implications, just shut up and calculate. Well, that's fine from a standpoint of engineering, of getting shit done. But philosophically, we've never acknowledged it. We did this big sidestep. We just said, oh my God, there's a huge problem there. Let's just set it aside and shut up and calculate. So does there need to be a recalibration or revisiting of that and saying, well, we really did kind of, just kind of play that game. Let's go back. But then the other thing to ask is, to what extent is that, again, this kind of social engineering? And I know it freaks people out when you say that, but it's like, to what extent are certain people wanting us to kind of not go down this one path and go down the other path? To what extent is there benefits to certain individuals or groups to keep things on this kind of dumbed down, materialistic kind of path? And to what extent will they push back against folks who want to kind of go down this other path? So that's another way of kind of answering your question, which is there a myth of progress thing going on here? Because we get this sense that, oh my gosh, we've just discovered that consciousness survives death. So now we're on a new frontier for doing that. Well, the flip side of that is, well, they've fucking known that for the longest time. And, you can even trace back to like real stuff. Like on the show Skeptiko, we looked at remote viewing. And a lot of people have looked at remote viewing, and you can go back to Stanford Research and Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and all those guys. And it's extremely well documented. They even made at the time in the 1960s or 70s, they made a documentary film and published and all this. They weren't basing that. They had completely transcended materialistic science, right? Mm-hmm. So for a long time, and they were as highly connected in the government, and that. So there's kind of this game being played for the longest time in terms of what's really understood and known at a deeper level within a certain branch of science, and what's kind of played out in this kind of the useful idiot science that we have. And then there's also, like I said, so you get me talking, I just won't stop. But there's also is the part of the shut up and calculate part, which says, from an engineering perspective, let's ignore some of those anomalies that don't seem to lead us anywhere, and let's ignore those. So what do you think of that? I mean, what do you think of that do you think there's this linear progression towards this huge leap now in understanding consciousness, and that's going to spring us forward, or is that kind of what you think?
Yes. But I just wanted to say as a footnote, I interviewed Brian Josephson, who you interviewed as well, and I think what he said is that he's working on a formula that would include mind in the formula. So the calculation would include consciousness. I don't know how, I have no idea how you would do that, but they're thinking about it. But I want to ask you too, how would, in the social engineering category, who would gain from not discussing consciousness? I mean, what does that affect the bottom line? I don't really get it.
Well, one of the things the reason I mentioned Josephus, kind of one of my favorite kind of little pet topics, and the pro-Roman Bible, is because the social engineering game has been going on from the beginning, or 2,000 years. And if people have problems with that, or they don't even know who Josephus is, or they haven't listened to Skeptiko about it, jump forward to Constantine, the 400 years AD, the guy who sets up the church, establishes the church. You go to the Catholics, they go, oh, St. Constantine. Well, St. Constantine is just, he's transparent in that he's just creating something so he can create a class of slaves. He takes all the people in the Roman Empire and says, hey, got a great new deal for you. It's called Christianity. And by the way, here's what goes with it. You now cannot own any land. You can't choose your profession. You have to be whatever your father was. You can be traded and done all these. He turns them into slaves, and he calls it serfdom, and he says, but don't worry. There is an afterlife, and you're going to be a part of it, and follow this little church thing that I've set up, which completely mirrors what they already had in the Roman Empire, the 12 thing, the apostle, the pope. It's just a mirror of the structure they had up. So take that as 400 AD, as clear as you can get to social engineering of saying, you know what, this is a smart way to govern people. Because if I have to go out there and start stabbing people and crucifying people, that's a messy business. And my guys don't like to do it that much, and it kind of creates a little bit. This is much better. I just tell them this and isn't that. Now, usually you hear this story being told from atheists. I am the furthest thing from an atheist. I think that's the most crazy idea, that there's nothing more to this. But you have to balance both sides. So you have to say, hey, that really did seem to be what was going on. But the real head scratcher, Gail, is to say, if that was 400 AD, and we see that happening again and again and again, well, then we better really study that before we can answer your question, which is, what would be the social engineering agenda of materialism? Would it be to keep us alone, afraid, isolated, feel like we don't have any power? What if I was controlling the world, would I want a lot of people who were awakened to their infinite potential, to their connection to something more than the state? Would I want a bunch of those people, or would I want a bunch of people sitting around watching Black Mirror on Netflix, feeling very alone, feeling very afraid, men all watching pornography, women all questioning whether they're really women or whether there's any gender or anything like that? And men too. I just want everyone kind of in a confused state. Which would I want? I don't know. If I was just a scientist running rats in a maze, I don't know.
So you're saying that if we understood consciousness, we would be empowered, and that would be a threat to the social forces that want us to be drinking our beer and numbed out and not questioning.
It does seem that when we go into the spiritual traditions, wherever we do, doesn't it, the reason we all get attracted to that is it loosens the binds that we feel on our life, on our mind, the limitations that we put on ourselves. It helps us connect with other people, whether it be in our family or our community. It does seem to have that effect. And the atheistic, materialistic, check your iPhone constantly does seem to kind of create a different effect. So I don't know if there's a cause and effect relationship there or not, or I don't know if that's an engineering project or not, but it's something to consider, you know.
Marx said that religion was the opiate of the people. What you said about, oh, well, I'm going to suffer now, but it's okay because I'll go to heaven. But so I think we need to distinguish between spirituality and religion, right?
Sure, definitely. But we also have to be super skeptical of atheists, because if you've bought into such a obviously silly, philosophical, and falsified scientifically idea that suggests that you are just a biological robot in a meaningless universe, you cannot recover from that. That isn't even wrong, like that famous scientist said. It isn't even wrong. It doesn't even rise to a level of being right or wrong. It's just nitwit brainwashing that you do. So Marx falls into that category of being an atheist that didn't even get the opening question to the test, and it was an open book test. Just go look at every culture, every society around the world throughout time, and they all say the same thing. Well, of course there's something more. Of course we're not just biological robots. Of course. So you can't get that one wrong, Marx. So we don't really need to listen to a lot of your other ideas, even though they might be true on some other level.
Well, Einstein is, I think, well known for saying that what really counts is the imagination, the miraculous. So he certainly had a sense of a higher force.
Of more, yeah.
Yeah,
of a more, right.
Yeah. When you have talked to these 400 people, did you find biographical patterns or similarities? Because my perspective is it takes a lot of courage to fight the ruling paradigm. So I'm wondering what you found in terms of their personal background and experience that led them say, okay, I'm going to speak up about this, even though the whole scientific establishment says I'm wrong and pseudo and crazy and woo-woo and not worth considering.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think everyone has a different way of coming at, these realizations in this work. And it'd be like me asking you about your path and that, and what motivates you now to kind of do so you see it. So now why do you have to tell everybody? Why do you have to go interview all these people? Why do you have to go write a book? And I'm sure you look at it sometimes, or you tell your friends about it, and they just kind of go, "Oh, nice, Gail. You're totally crazy. What are you?"
Not my friends.
Well, I think we all experience that, or family. It's even worse. Yeah, it's not your friends. Your friends are okay, cool with it. But when you have to get together with family for Thanksgiving, it's a different story. You just sit there and shut up. So it's different for every person. And it is like this, to use back to the Christian thing, it's like the born again, Some people just go through life and they just don't have any interest in exploring things beyond a very superficial level, or that's just how they're wired, or they can't deal with more of that, or their life circumstances don't allow that, or whatever it is. I wasn't on a path of discovery necessarily, but when I look back, I guess I always did have a certain inkling, but I think things could have easily turned out very different for me, where I would have been not focused on this as much. So who's to know? Who's to say? It's great. Everyone's story, I think, is awesome. Everyone's story in that regard is particularly interesting. What did send you on this path? Did you always feel this way? Did you always?
I remember when I was in 4th grade, my teacher had me take a little girl who was very odd out, and into the garden so she could talk to the rest of the class about how mean they were to Christine Glasspool, who sucked her thumb and was kind of blubbery and had an English accent. So I think since I was very little, I've always had a sense of wanting to fight for the underdog or speak for the underdog. So my 18 or 20 books or whatever they are, they're very disparate topics, but they all have to do with giving voice to people who aren't heard. And so this is definitely an underdog paradigm that I'm helping to give voice to. So it's just something about my innate personality. It wasn't particularly come from outside that I care about the unexpressed and making it expressed.
What about the spiritual aspect of this, though? I mean, how did you meander into that?
Well, my mother took my brother and I to the Church of Religious Science, which is now called Center for Spiritual Enrichment. So we were raised, Jesus loves me, yes I know, for we are strong as he is strong. So I read Ernest Holmes, I read Houston Smith's book, Religions of Man, when I was in high school, and had an aha experience when I read about Hinduism and karma and reincarnation. So it's been a part of my family background since I was little.
Okay.
Oh, and then the other thing is that I had a sabbatical from teaching at Chico State, and I was in a program that was based on the Berkeley Psychic Institute. So it was about developing intuitive healing, kind of clairvoyant ability. So I can read your chakras over the phone as easy as I can read them and work with them person to person. So I've had that kind of personal experience with psi phenomena.
So have you found that to be your experience in terms of confirming that you do have that ability and it works in a kind of technical, scientific kind of way? Have you ever tested that, like, scientifically?
Well, I think what the test is that I'll work with someone that I don't know, even on the phone, and hit their core issue very specifically. And they'll say, oh yeah, that's what I'm working on, or that's what's going on for me. So what confirms it is the confirmation that my insights are correct. Or I used to have these little precog visions when I was in my 20s, and then like a guy I was going to meet, or a job that I was going to get, or how long I was going to be at that teaching job, and they came true. So what I liked about doing the training is I could turn it on, whereas before it was just pop out, depending on what I was concerned about. So now I like it because I can turn it on at will.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you, when you think of the people you've interviewed, who pops out as like, whoa, that person was brilliant and insightful, and I'm thinking about what they said? Does any people stand out like that?
There's so many, Gail, and it really has been a continuous adventure for me, and it's so fun because I feel like the people who are nice enough to come on Skeptiko are leading me on this path that I don't even know and I'm discovering. But I guess the one that always sticks out in my head is Dr. Jeff Long, the near-death experience researcher, who's a full-time radiation oncologist and highly regarded in his field outside of New Orleans in Yuma, Louisiana. So it's a guy who's a doctor. He's a working doctor who just had this curiosity because he works with death and dying patients all the time. And some of his patients started to say, hey, I had this near-death experience. What do I do with this? Actually, he ran across those accounts when he was in medical school, and he was like, or right after medical school. I think it was a bit when he was in residency. And he was like, hey, did you see this? I mean, isn't this? And everyone's like, no, just keep going forward. He's like, no, this kind of changes everything. And then he goes on and studies it. But The story I always like about Jeff Long, which is kind of tangential to that story, is he's now become this New York Times best-selling author who's written about near-death experience. He's collected the largest database of near-death experience accounts, and he's been a major factor in contributing to this body of science, we can't call it anything else, that confirms that consciousness in some way we don't understand survives bodily death. And if people don't like that bodily death, it survives a brain state that isn't supposed to be able to produce consciousness. So if you get hung up on how long the brain stays after you die, it's like, forget all that. When you shut down the heart and there's no blood flow to the brain, a couple minutes later, brains aren't supposed to do anything. They're just not. Despite any new discoveries we have, all our neurological models say you can't do that. I digress, because the story about Jeff is a skeptical guy came to him and said, hey, I think you're wrong. I want to do some research. And Jeff's like, hey, I'm wide open here. I'll share my data with you and all this. And the guy comes back and he writes this book, never really collaborates with him, but writes this book and says, hey, it's all bullshit. It's all about REM intrusion, that sleep REM intrusion. And he publishes his work. And here's the point. Jeff reads his work and he goes, oh my God, he's right. Could I have been wrong? I guess I was wrong. And he questions himself, and he has doubt about his own work, his significant work. And then he looks a little bit further and he goes, oh, wait a minute, he didn't account for this. And oh, he didn't account for that and he didn't do this. Oh my gosh, of course, he's way wrong, which he is, because I've had the guy on Skeptiko and his idea doesn't make any sense. But that moment of doubt, that moment of being open to perpetual doubt, to challenging himself, to questioning himself, that is a deeper spirituality that I really am drawn to. That's what the show Skeptiko is about. Inquiry to perpetuate doubt. Don't be settled, because there's also something deeply spiritual about that in the yogic nada, not this, not this, not this. And that's what the Greeks were saying with Skeptiko. Not this, not this, not this. Oh, it's not any of these things that my crazy monkey mind can try and create. And it's not any of that. It's something more. It transcends that.
Have you had any psi experiences yourself?
Not really anything to speak of, like minor little things like everyone else had. I kind of learned to lucid dream from my son, who, had lucid dreams all the time and was like, hey, isn't this, like, what? That's really strange. And I investigated. So, I've had other kind of slight precognitive experiences, but very, very minor.
Last question is, in the face of climate change, maybe 12 years to turn it around, the rise of autocrats around the world, are you hopeful or not hopeful about our future as humanity?
I'm not convinced on climate change, other than that it's one of the most obscene distortions of science that we'd ever see. I mean, ClimateGate 1, ClimateGate 2, ClimateGate 3 are probably the most dramatic examples of how science can be commandeered and engineered for political gain. So I don't know what the answer to the climate question is, but when I look at how the data has been manipulated, how the scientific education about that topic has been manipulated, it's so much of what I've investigated on Skeptiko in terms of, how the truth is obscured by just a lot of arm-waving bullshit. It's like, finally we've come out and they're finally outed on vaccines, right? I don't know if you've seen that, but now they've had to finally admit, okay, there is a correlation between autism and these vaccines, right? And we don't know exactly. And so CDC whistleblower has come out, right? A guy who used to work at the CDC and said, hey, they asked me to bury these reports. And he published, and the senator, congressman, whatever, was in Congress and introduced it on the floor. And now there's another whistleblower has come out and said that. And he said, hey, they brought in a big garbage basket. and the garbage bin, and said, okay, start throwing the stuff in there. We don't want to get caught, right? So it's like science has to be held in check, and we have to be really, really careful about understanding what we believe and what we don't believe. So if you look at in climate, if anyone has any questions about this, I've done several shows on it, not diving into the climate science part of it, because there's other people that do that much better, but diving into the belief systems that people have. You know, Rick Archer from Buddha at the Gas Pump is a friend of mine, and he does an awesome show on spirituality, but he's a climate alarmist nut like so many people are. We did a show because he was saying, the 97% consensus, and I said, that's a complete bullshit number, and you would prove it to yourself if you just investigated it for 15 minutes. So he came on the show, and we did, and he had to admit, yeah, that's completely an absurd number, because the way they got that is they hired a bunch of grad students to review all these papers and read the abstracts and then rate them as the abstracts. So think about that as a methodology for your experiment. I am going to have this statistic, 97% consensus climate change. The basis for that is not that I talk to climate scientists, not that I talk to scientists, is that I read the abstracts from these papers, and I had these grad students put them in a bin of saying pro or against. Now, a lot of scientists came out afterwards and said, hey, wait a minute. I'm against your conclusion, and you read the abstracts on 5 of my papers, and you put them all in the wrong pile. So what's up with that? And Judith Curry, climatologist from Georgia Tech, highly regarded in her field, she's written about this extensively, someone can go read. The real number is more like 55%. 55% of climatologists, people who've really looked at this, believe that's your consensus, 55 versus 45. But you don't hear that. You hear 97%, it still gets echoed out there. And people are going to hear this for the first time. They're going to think I have some kind of political agenda, or that I'm crazy, or any of the rest of that. Well, just go look at the smart people that have written on this. Another guy is Henry Bauer, Dr. Henry Bauer, who's been on the show a couple times, written a couple of books. He's from Virginia Tech and has written these books on why we don't trust science. So a long rant on the climate thing, but it's like, how do I feel about the future? I take the climate thing in a different direction. Not that there's an imminent destruction of our environment that's going to, cause it, but that there is an imminent push politically to kind of control things and socially engineer things in a way that we don't fully understand or appreciate that. And that doesn't mean left or right. I think at this point, anyone who believes in a left or right, in Democrats versus Republicans, it's like, oh my God, we can't even begin to have a conversation. If you believe there is such a dichotomy, that's, to me, it just seems completely ridiculous at this point to think that, especially when any of us who are old enough to live through some of these regime changes that are just the same thing. It's just shuffling the deck chairs. There's no difference in any of these groups. It's just a sideshow. Long answer, short question. Apologize.
But no, don't apologize. So are you saying you're not convinced that humans are contributing to climate change?
Clearly, like if you talk to the real people, I think, who are really doing the science, everyone agrees on that. Everyone agrees that humans are affecting the environment. The fact that people think that is the question is the problem, because the question is, what policies should we enact given what we currently know? And is that the best thing we could do with our resources? And clearly at this point, like Paris. So you go look at Paris, right? The Paris Accords. That's insane. It's insane to support that, in my opinion, from a policy standpoint. It's ridiculous. You don't have China on board. You don't have India on board. You don't really have any kind of agreement from just take it from purely...
India and China signed it. They're on board.
Yeah, they're on board, but they're on board in what sense? They're not going to be regulated or forced to commit to any right. So they're on board just because they paid them off to be on board, but not in terms of making any commitments. Not like the people of Europe who actually have to come out of pocket today in order to offset that thing. So it's just such a game. It's such a scam, and the science would not lead someone to the Paris Accords. Is my point. My read of the science, and also again, we have to accept that the science has been corrupted. Clearly, it's been corrupted. If you go ask that question, it's back to the Gloria Steinem thing. The only pushback you get is, well, they had to. It was such a dire situation. They had to fudge the numbers because no one was paying any attention, so they had to. It's not the way science is supposed to work.
I agree.
Climategate is real. Climategate is real in the sense that, we have all these emails of these guys who are cooking the books in order to get a certain answer that was in line with what these policy people want. You just have to put a full stop on everything and say, okay, time out. They lied about everything. It's like the thing with vaccines. They lied. The whistleblower comes out and says, look, I was there. Here's the correlation. They lied. Well, we might have lied about that one, but there still is this. We have to protect the herd. No, science demands that we do a full stop when there's lying and say, okay, we have to get to the bottom of it, not just push forward with the agenda.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned in terms of the new paradigm, the concern with consciousness rather than material as primary, that you want to add?
No, let's do it. Let's get it out there. Let's make it. Let's see the paradigm shift happen. Let's be the paradigm shift.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate